So when you're going back to your own farm, your own horse, you can think about some general concepts. So this is a common scenario, unfortunately a common scenario. So horse recently returned from a local agricultural fair show. You could insert any type of thing, remove it off the farm. Now it isn't feeling well, has a fever. So it's a little bit dumpy, it didn't eat its grain, take its temperature, and it's got a fever. So, well, any ideas what I'm worried about here? What would you be worried about? Colic, probably not as much fever, but possibility. Virus, yeah, some type of viral infection, some types of bacterial infection. A couple of big high-profile ones, equine influenza, strangles, that's a bacterial infection, strep equi, equine herpes virus, brewing disease, it's kind of with the colic, but GI signs. So salmonella, where they're going to break with diarrhea soon and they're uncomfortable. Clostridium difficile, another cause of diarrhea. So I'm worried about a few things, but I'm worried about an infection. When I see not feeling well, and then really when I see fever on top of that, that's infectious until proven otherwise. So something's going on, and if it's infectious, that means I've got to worry that it can spread it to everyone else on the farm and spread it to me until proven otherwise, because salmonella I can get from a horse. And salmonella is not pleasant to have. So we need to be worried about infectious diseases in a situation like this. So think back about what happens here. Okay, well, I went to the fair, show, whatever, and what happened? Well, it was stressed. It had nose-to-nose contact with other horses. It was touched by lots of people. They shared items. They shared buckets. Maybe they shared a water trough. Then it came home. Then it went back in the general population. So we've got, think of our exposure things. We've got lots of different exposure risks here. And then we're coming back in the general population, so we're worried about further exposure. This is done. This is stuff we need to think about down the road of how we can reduce the risk of it. But I'm dealing with now a sick horse that's in the barn, and I want to make that horse better, and I also want to make sure the other horses don't get sick. So when we're thinking about this, where can we intervene in this? Well, we can think about what we can do before the show at home, what we can do at the show, and what we can do at home after the show. And again, this doesn't have to be a show scenario. It can be whatever thing you do with your horse, just breaking up into different areas and thinking about what we can do. Okay, so let's think about before. So it's not sick, let's just think about what happens before a show and things that we can think about to reduce disease transmission. Well, is it healthy before leaving? And I know it's tough to miss shows and events, and people often push the envelope thinking, he doesn't look that great, but he'll be okay. We'll take him there and he'll be okay. And there are two sides of this why it's important to see that they're healthy before they go. One is if they're a little bit sick, shipping, stressing, everything else might make them a lot sick. Might take a mild disease to a more serious disease. The other thing is if they're sick, can they make everyone else sick? And you don't want to go to a show or an event and have someone that knowingly brought something to infect you, so you don't want to do that. So just that pre-show objective, let's actually really look at it, not do the blinders. I didn't see that sneeze. I didn't see that runny nose or cough. Let's really think if they're healthy. More broadly, we've got our vaccination program. And it's the third line of defense, but if we're going to events, we're going to have that exposure risk. So what is our vaccination program? How does that jive with exposures that we're going to see? It shows in this area, in this time of year, knowing what kind of disease transmission is happening. And talking to your vet is very good overall, but your vet also probably has a good idea of what infections they're seeing. If things are different this year than before, and how all the vaccines are working before. And just a predetermined infection control program that's, again, not fancy, but says, okay, when I go to a show, what am I going to do? Well, I'm not going to let it go nose to nose with another horse. I'm going to bring my own buckets. I'm not going to fill the bucket from the common water trough that other horses are drinking from. I'm going to fill it up. I'm going to do these really basic things that don't take much more effort at all. They make a lot of sense, but they don't take a lot more work, don't cost anything to reduce the risk of exposure. So it's that kind of pre-show risk assessment. Here's what I can do. At the show, well, then I'm going to do those things, or not do those things, as the case may be. No sharing of items, watch for and avoid sick horses, restrict contact with other horses, and lots of other things too, but just some examples. And what am I going to do at home? Well, like I said before, isolate, quarantine if I can, as much as possible. So if it brings something home, it's not going to affect everyone or cohort. So have it with a certain group of horses, so if it brings something home, it's only going to expose that small group as opposed to the bigger group or the high-risk group. And I'm going to monitor them. Because I know a couple days after a show, that's when there's probably a greater chance of sickness. So you might as well pay more attention then. So the concept that I mentioned before, risk assessment. And it sounds like a fancy term, maybe. It sounds like a boring term. But it's something to think about before we do something. Is what are the risks associated with this. And what am I going to do with it? Well, I'm driving home after this. What are my risks? Well, I'm driving off the road, running into something, X, Y, and Z. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to be sober, and I'm going to wear a seatbelt, and I'm not going to be stupid when I'm driving. So it's something we kind of do every day through our activities, but we can step back and just, it's applying some of these common sense things. So think about what the risks are with the event you're going to, and think about what practical measures I can do to reduce that risk, whether it's in the big picture in terms of my overall farm program and vaccination, or whether it's specific things that I'm going to do at this show. Targeted vaccination, another concept, which ties in obviously to vaccination before, and it ties into having this farm-specific and horse-specific program. But even it's more than that, saying, here's what I'm going to vaccinate for every year, is thinking about when I'm going to vaccinate. Because some vaccines give us really nice long-term protection, some give us shorter-term protection. And ideally, if you know that your horse is going to be exposed to something in a narrow window, if it's showing all year round or racing all year round, that's different than if it's got this big high-risk event. Or if it goes to a show that you know is really big and really prone to exposure. If it's a really kind of defined period, then I'd really like to make sure my vaccination is timed such that I've got my peak immunity, my best protection, around the time of my greatest risk. So if all I do is go to a couple shows in advance of the Royal and go to the Royal, which is horses from everywhere crammed in, then I want to have my vaccination done so that I've got good immunity around that time period, because maybe I'm not going to have my horse see another horse from January till May. That's just the way it operates. So just thinking about basic concepts like that, about the diseases we're going to do, and about timing. And thinking about what identifiable signs that would indicate an infectious disease might be present, or is more likely to be present. And there's certain things that we know. If we look at a horse and it does this or has this, odds are greater that it's got an infectious disease. And it doesn't cost money, or you don't have to be a vet or anything to say that a horse is coughing, horse is diarrhea, right? If you can't tell diarrhea from this big pile of watery stuff on the ground versus the fecal balls, you probably shouldn't be around a horse. So what are some really basic things that we can look at? Well, cough. So a horse that's coughing now that hasn't been coughing before. Sure, it might be allergic airway disease, might be something else, but that's a big trigger. Fever, nasal discharge, especially when it's just started. So it might have had nasal discharge for a long time for something, but if it hasn't, and all of a sudden it's got a runny nose, yeah, that's something I want to be concerned about. Decreased appetite, diarrhea, abortion. These are examples. So these are things that anyone can see. Anyone on the farm can see. It could be the kid that comes out and cleans out stalls on the weekend. If they know that these are important things for you to know about, and they tell you about them, it lets you intervene a lot quicker. Because for a lot of infectious diseases, the quicker we intervene, the better. Because we can get on treatment quicker to make it better in terms of their outcome and how well we address the infection. And we can also get them out of the area, prevent them from exposing other horses if we can get them out quick. And there's certain scenarios where this is really classic, and strangles is the big one. I'll come back to that one. So thinking syndromic surveillance. Thinking about situations with your horse or your farm where you want to know about it and then you want to do something about it. And those are really easy. So it's a very basic concept that we, again, a lot of us, we do it on a routine basis. You look at a horse and it starts coughing, it hasn't coughed before, something's going on here. And the key with using that for infection control is taking it the next step, saying, okay, something's going on here, so now I'm going to do something about it, as opposed to just sit and watch it for a few days while maybe it's spewing out equine influenza. Okay, so syndromic surveillance is cheap, it's easy, and it lets us identify things for further action. A lot of the stuff with infection control is we identify a problem, but then we'd have to do something about it. So if we don't do something, then identifying the problem didn't help us. Okay, so back here, a horse came home from the show or the sale or the race or whatever it was. A couple days later, it's not eating and it has a runny nose. Well, what can we do? We've got three different things we can, well, we've got a lot of things we can do. So kind of three broad areas. One is we can isolate it. So keep it in a stall or move it to our isolation stall or paddock that's way away, something to get it away from other horses, and it can call the vet. Because something's abnormal here. Horse is sick, maybe it's a problem. I can isolate it and I can wait and see. So do the same thing, I just maybe won't call the vet. It's got runny nose, doesn't look that bad, but maybe it's a weekend, maybe the vet's not available, maybe just not gonna worry about spending the money on a vet because it's not looking too bad right now, but I'm gonna keep a close eye on it. Or I'm gonna say, okay, something's abnormal with this horse, I'm gonna watch you closely. I'm gonna come out and I'm gonna take your temperature again tonight, tomorrow morning, and we're gonna see what happens and does anything develop. Okay, so later on we see this, and you see these are big lymph nodes. These are big glands underneath here. These bumps aren't supposed to be there. So you see fever, and we see nasal discharge, and we see enlarged lymph nodes under there. We think strangles. We think basically strangles and not a whole lot else. So if this actually was strangles, and this is not that uncommon, let's think about what happens with these different chains of what we could have done. So if we isolate it and call a vet, vet comes out, looks at it, says, yeah, it's probably got strangles. We'll keep it isolated. Here's what we're going to do to contain the problem, and here's how we're going to manage the horse. Nothing else happens. If we do the middle ground, we isolate it and wait and see. Vet's called in when the horse gets a little bit worse, lymph nodes get a bit bigger, horse looks a little bit uglier, strangles is suspected and then confirmed, but the horse is isolated, so nothing happened beyond that horse. Horse is a little bit more advanced by the time the vet looked at it, which may not have been a big deal for this case. Or if we do the wait and see or don't notice, strangles is diagnosed after the horse becomes infectious, and that's how we get the outbreak. There's one thing we know with strangles, which is really, really great for strangles control, is they spike a fever 2 to 3 days before they become infectious. So that fever is an early sign. So if I've got a strangles outbreak going on and this horse develops a fever, it's not going to be infectious for a couple days. So if I can recognize that fever and I can get that horse out of the way, it's not able to infect other horses. So a situation like this, by getting them isolated, a couple days later when you figure what's going on, even if you do the wait and see, yeah, they're infectious, but they're out of the way. If we say, okay, let's watch them, maybe it's not that sick, you're getting beyond the end of that non-infectious window, all of a sudden, yep, now it's spewing out strep equi, now you're getting other horses that are getting exposed, and you've gone from one sick horse in a stall by itself that, yeah, it's a pain to manage it with isolation. Wear gloves, wear a different set of coveralls or a coat or something, clean, disinfect, all those things. But you're just doing that for one horse, as opposed to 2 weeks later, you're doing that for 10 horses because you spread it all around the barn.